Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with David Frank. We're discussing national political news of the day, and there's all kinds of stuff to discuss. But I figured as we're getting into the election season that we could start by talking about the politics around what Democrats are calling voter suppression. What Republicans are calling voter reform or election reform or enforcement of the laws. And it's coming up. Lawsuits are being filed. In Texas, they actually the government actually raided several civil rights organizations that had been registering people to vote. This is being seen as intimidation, not to mention other aspects of voter suppression. They cleared like 1.1 million names off of the voter rolls. Most of them are probably people who had died or had moved, but there are accusations that the net was cast way too wide, and that a lot of people who are should be able to vote are not registered to vote, and they might not learn that they're unregistered until it's too late. How many people? We don't know. Louisiana, they just passed a law that has kind of threatening reminders that you have to be being sent with ballot registration, and you have to be a citizen. And then it's less of an issue of suppression in Georgia. Of course, we've had a number of lawsuits around them shortening the time for early voting, not allowing food or water to be distributed in lines, that type of thing. But they also have passed some laws that would give the voter boards. There's in every county, there's a panel of, I think, like 3 people who will approve or certify the vote counting. And some laws were passed that in Georgia that would allow them or even require that they shut the board, that they refuse to certify an election if there are questions being raised, complaints being made by people, by regular citizens. And the problem with that is normally you'd go to court on something like that. And so not only the Harris campaign, but the Georgia Democrats are suing to set those laws aside. There are other elements happening across the country, but those are the 3 that have made the news recently. A lot to talk about. Dave, which one would you like to talk about first?
Yeah, I just think it's interesting that you had to use sorry, I just hit my camera. I think it's interesting that you had to say those are the 3 states that hit the news recently, because it's worth mentioning that since 2020, there have been over 560 new laws passed across the country, designed to have an impact on the election in the name of election integrity. But as we'll talk about during this period, in many cases, it's scratching an itch of where people have the perception, arguably from a logical and an evidentiary perspective, that their perceptions are ill-founded. But nonetheless, these are based on the belief that somehow there was a massive fraud committed across the country and that states had to do something about it. In reality, I think what we're going to talk about, again, not to say that I know we only have a limited time today,
right,
but prior to 2013 Supreme Court ruling, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 required any changes in former Confederate states, any changes to voting laws, needed pre-clearance, because the Justice Department had found that these, any kind of significant changes were typically designed to suppress the vote in some way or another, obstruct it, limit access. And it turns out that as soon as that Supreme Court ruling limited the reach of the Voting Rights Act and pre-clearance was no longer necessary, this is the type of thing we get. So I'll just dive right in and start with Texas, because it's got that big top line number, which is a million people purged from the rolls, the voter rolls. And apologies if I missed that you said it, but the Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, under the auspices of voter integrity, they created the state of Texas. They created an election integrity unit, and in the last week or so, they initiated because time is a blur now with the news cycle moving so fast, but they initiated a bunch of raids on people's homes. So, for example, a set of people, like one person who was a 35-year veteran voter registration activist, other candidates, a House candidate, a mayoral candidate. There are people whose homes were raided because they were perceived to potentially be involved in some voter fraud. So they raided their homes. And so people were associated with an organization called the League of United Latin American Citizens. And that organization has appealed to the Department of Justice to say that, look, we respectfully request, I was going to say demand, we respectfully request that there's be a DOJ intervention. The federal Department of Justice really needs to intervene because the state of Texas has engaged in a major Voting Rights Act violation. And so just to put a fine point on it, they said they were seizing all electronic devices in these people's homes, opening any business, election, or organization-related documents and swabbing them for DNA. Presumably, they were looking for not presumably, in the warrant, it said the purpose was to look for any evidence of violations of state election law regarding vote harvesting and identity fraud. So but it turns out that they're basically raided people's houses. In a sense, this was intimidation because there was no evidence that any of this had happened.
Complete Fourth Amendment violations. I would love to take on one of those lawsuits.
I think it would be worth your time and energy if we were in that state, I suppose. But the truth is that people do move, and then sometimes they move out of state. People die. But they were really looking for non-citizens and fraud. And according to the Attorney General's office, they did identify 6,500 people who were not citizens on the voter rolls. And they said about 1,900 of those people had voted in the past. But the claim from this has to be adjudicated still. The defense of that is, well, actually, you don't even know that if you had the right person, because people have similar names, among other things. So there's a whole set of reasons why the state could be completely fabricating it. But if the idea is that it's 1,900 people out of a million, then this might be the tail wagging the dog a little bit here in this Texas example.
Yeah, well, that's exactly why Trump's when he established that committee to root out all of the massive voter fraud, his committee just disappeared one day. And all of a sudden, all of the records that they found, I think they found about 15 cases, about 9 of which were actually Republicans cheating. And, and no people who were here illegally, a couple of non-citizens voting, one in Texas because she thought that she had the right to do, but she was actually a legal resident. And of course, they went after her to really hammer her with a sentence, strong sentences. That's what they are doing. But it's intimidation. They want to see if they can keep people from voting because people might not necessarily know whether they're qualified or not. This is a tactic, and it works. Of course, we've already been dealing with a lot of the laws of the requirements of photo ID, which, by the way, do not add any security to the votes. We've got. I've just asked local people who believe that this leads to voter fraud to just go and talk to our own elections people and explain how they cross-reference and how the signatures are matched and it's very unlikely that somebody does it. Usually when it happens, it's somebody who died recently and their spouse or other family member takes it upon themselves to vote. That's the most common voter fraud. But it hasn't influenced any election, not even one anywhere, that we can tell. And yet, Trump said yesterday that if Jesus was counting the votes, he would win in California because because Jesus would know who was a citizen and who wasn't, right? I mean, it's just it boggles the mind, but it is an attempt. They want to make it harder to vote, and even this thing in Louisiana, which there probably isn't going to be a lawsuit about, but it's intended to intimidate people to go out, and they'll say, well, it only applies to people who are here illegally, but you've got threatening literature going out with the notices and the registration paperwork that has people wondering, do I qualify? Am I a felon? All that kind of stuff. So it's just and we're going to be hearing a lot more about this because Texas is all of a sudden an issue, as is Florida, because the polls now have both the presidential races and the Senate races close, and these are potential pickups for the Democrats. So there's going to be a lot of fighting over this, as to especially if the election is close.
And so, Eric, two things. One, because Georgia and North Carolina are so important, I would like to do Georgia last in our time that we have left on this segment. So I'm going to really quickly address Louisiana, because when I looked up voter suppression in Louisiana, I found a totally different issue. And this one is actually a lawsuit. So it is the disability rights population. There's an organization called Disability Rights Louisiana. They did already file a lawsuit challenging a couple of state laws that they argue are violations of the Voting Rights Act. So this is for people, primarily for people that are in like nursing homes, skilled nursing facilities, memory care centers. They passed two laws to try to help these people vote. Because basically, if you're home with your family is going to help you with your ballot. Your family would help you potentially be a witness on an absentee ballot, because it's not as easy to vote in most places as it is in California. You don't need a witness just because you mail in your own ballot here in California.
Yeah.
But in Louisiana, you do need a witness that it's really you. So they passed two laws. One that said you can't help anybody except for immediate family members. And
Right.
a second one is that you can't be a witness to more than one person that's not a non-immediate family member. So basically, those are in effect for this election, and so it's criminal if anybody in any senior facility or care facility helps people vote right now. And so they're basically saying this is an easy violation of people's rights, because without a family member there, people are relying on these other folks. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that even between you and I, we were looking for voter intimidation, voter suppression, and we, I found one that I had no idea was in place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 4 years ago, the Georgia, under some interpretation of the law, and I don't know whatever happened with the lawsuit. I was trying to find it, but there was an organization that went to senior housing with a bus, and the people and there were people, they were going to take seniors to the polls to vote. This wasn't ballot harvesting or anything. This was bringing actual people, and literally the police came and ordered everybody off the bus and said that they couldn't be driving people to the polls, that was somehow a violation of the law. One of two things in that situation: either the law is really draconian and stupid and deliberately intended to, or the police just acted on their own stupidity. It's hard to know which that was, but that was just absolutely wrong. Now, I do believe that the bus people, the people taking them, were eventually allowed to take them, but just the fact that even happened, I mean, it's beyond crazy. And yes, it's going to be close in some of these states, and these suppression efforts can make the difference.
Which, let's dive into Georgia, because there are two whole entire sets of packages of rules that were put in place to make it so that I think if we put a pin in Georgia and we come back to it on election night, we're going to find Georgia is rife with shenanigans. So let's I'll talk about one set of laws, and then maybe for 1 minute, and then for maybe 1 minute you could follow up. So they passed a package of laws that say, number one, there's no limits to the reasons why any citizen can challenge any other voter's eligibility to vote. And number two, the counties have to make every ballot viewable to the public with personal identifying information removed so that they can have any citizens could lead their own audit teams. And then three, they this is a smaller one, but specify that all workers must be U.S. citizens, and it reduced the requirement that there be a specified a ratio between voting machines and the population. So that last one doesn't seem to be voter suppression. It just seems to be part of a theme, scratched someone's itch or something like that. But what we've seen is an overwhelming, over 500,000 challenges have already been filed to people, to neighbors' eligibilities to vote, and it's systematic. And we'll probably have to do another topic on it another time. But like, these challenges are designed to make it so that it slows down the system. They're overwhelming the county's capacity to do their job. They're intimidating people by having neighbors call out neighbors, and they're spreading disinformation by just buying one list of, say, mail forwarding, and then buying another list of, say, voter rolls. And if there's any mismatches, they're filing tens of thousands, 500,000 complaints. And the federal courts, other people have already stepped in and said this is shoddy and rife with errors. So it's a big and ongoing problem.
Good evening. Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. The indictment was issued by a grand jury of citizens here in the District of Columbia, and it sets forth the crimes charged in detail. I encourage everyone to read it in full. The attack on our nation's capital on January 6, 2021, was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election.
So it's been a few months since we've talked about, well, maybe not a few months, but some weeks since we've talked about Donald Trump's legal problems, and of course the criminal actions against him, all of which seem to have been slowed down for one reason or another long enough that the trials are not going to happen before the election. Now, Jack Smith has two criminal actions against Donald Trump, one in Florida on the classified documents case, which has been dismissed on the basis of how he was selected as a special counsel. And the other one, January 6th cases, where he's being accused of conspiracy to thwart the election, basically, had been put on hold for a while because of the Supreme Court's rulings that if he did anything in his official capacity as president, that he could not be charged for that, but Judge Roberts, who's usually kind of a judicial restraint kind of a guy, even took it beyond something that wasn't even raised in the lawsuit, saying you can't even use any official acts as evidence of an overall conspiracy. So it can't be seen as one act. So Jack Smith asked for extra time to be able to file his amended indictments, and it's been pared down a bit, and any mention of anybody who has an official capacity, such as Jeff Clark, is omitted, and it focuses in on the fake elector scheme and the pressure on Georgia and a couple of other things that are clearly not in his official capacity. And in fact, in the new indictments, Jack Smith repeats over and over again, whenever he names something that is not in the presidential, within the presidential capacity. It's going to be very hard for the Supreme Court to strike it down, although people are thinking they might just do it anyway, just because they're taking a real broad position of this crazy immunity, which is going to get the country in trouble someday because of the precedent. It's a horrible precedent. So you have the refiling of the indictment, which just happened yesterday, and then you have the appeal of the case down in Florida, which Judge Eileen Cannon has made, and it's 81 pages. I've skimmed over it and read some of the summaries, but it's an 81-page appeal, and legal experts are saying it's pretty much automatic that she's going to be overturned. The question is whether or not she's going to be removed from the case, and there are legal experts that would say that it would be a major act of legal negligence for the 11th Circuit to not remove her from the case. So
yeah, so I say I'll start with Florida, responding to your comments about Florida, just because I think that's a little bit easier one to address. Then we could dive back to the DC case, U.S. District Court. So in Florida, like you had said, the big picture issue is that the judge said in effect that the special counsel was not lawfully appointed, therefore the charges must be dismissed. And the reason that you had alluded to, that the so many legal scholars are saying that this is an open and shut appeal from Special Prosecutor Smith, is that there's going back to Watergate, the Watergate case, going back that far, it's established case law that the Attorney General has broad discretion to appoint people to work on cases, and so I think that there's a very tiny little legalese reading of the law that was pointed out here that basically said, well, technically this person wasn't already an employee of the Justice Department, and so therefore that it's like the fruit from the poison tree. But this is exactly not how it's ever been practiced or implemented. So it just seems like an inexperienced judge engaged in overreach on behalf of former president who she considers her client. And I think, like you said, this is a disciplinary breach that the 11th Circuit will conceivably act on, even though it's highly rare that they do. This is an extreme overreach, I think, on her part, which may result in just being removed from the case. And that would be the just thing to do for the American people, I believe, in that case.
It's because this is the second time she's been overruled, and last time they slammed her hard for it. I mean, for abuse of discretion, and it seems very unlikely. And Jack Smith isn't even asking for her removal, but that doesn't matter. The 11th Circuit judges were really upset with her last time, and they're probably going to be very upset with her this time. Because she just went so far out, just ignoring precedent, saying it was advisory, ignoring decades of understanding of the law, and even if she was right that he was not properly appointed, that's not grounds for dismissal. There's no case in which a whole case was dismissed because of that. They could have to put somebody else in charge of it in the DOJ, somebody in-house or something like that. But there's no grounds for it whatsoever. It just is completely arbitrary. I mean, she is acting exactly the way Trump's biggest accusers accuse them of putting somebody in there who's a total sycophant. Now, I don't know if that's true. I can't get into her head, but she is acting exactly that way. And the decision, which I've had a chance to read, is mind-boggling. I will read the appeal eventually, but there's a bunch of different reasons for overturning, and people are just not even spending a lot of time writing on it. Legal experts who were asked to write an opinion column says, I don't know if I can fill a whole column in. The decision was just completely stupid. But it did have the effect of ensuring that the case will not happen before the election.
Which is a great pivot to the DC case, because again, this is, even though there was a superseding indictment filed for the reasons you described to harmonize and comply with the Supreme Court's holdings and the remand instructions based on the immunity interpretation, which is highly controversial and suspect law. But they made it up out of whole cloth. But they effectively violated the Constitution. I think a lot of people believe the Supreme Court did. But in any event, I think Jack Smith decided that he was just going to resubmit entirely. They convened a new grand jury. That it was a new refiling of a completely new indictment, in the sense that, I would say completely new, heavily revised indictment, shrunk from 45 to 36 pages. So it tells you about a quarter of it's gone. But that's because they eliminated anything that had to do with an official act. So any of the communications that happened internally in the White House, internally in the Justice Department, anytime that the indictment tried to say, look, Trump's lawyers were telling him X, Y, and Z, kind of like the January 6th committee, where all those people on Trump's staff were testifying. Look, we kept telling them, and these are Republicans. So Jack Smith tried to use the January 6th committee evidence, but now they've had to take. It seems like they've taken it all. I didn't read it, of course. Right. I just skimmed it, but skimmed what I saw there, and but the takeaway is, for example, anytime they say Trump, they say candidate Trump, and anytime they say Pence, they say that he's the running mate Pence. So they literally he tried, anytime that they talked about January 6th at the rally, they said the privately funded rally or the privately organized rally.
Yes.
So and that anytime anything happened that Trump did on Twitter, it said that for personal purposes. So that so just tried to lock down any wiggle room for that. There might be grounds for appeal, basically. So I'm curious if one last thing. It did remove some specific allegations, but it's the same 4 criminal charges, including conspiracy to defraud the United States. And all the co-conspirators are still there, except for, as you mentioned, they removed one, Jeffrey Clark. So I'm curious, do you think that this like refresh, this redo, this reboot, I'll give you this last thing, Eric. I saw a quote that said Trump's lucky streak with his criminal cases may have ended. In other words, this could be the one. Do you have a sense that this could be the one?
The only thing I can figure is that there is some concern that it gets back to the Supreme Court, and it will, because they're going to challenge it, is that the Supreme Court, as Roberts' decision was kind of vague on some points. And so they're going to look carefully as to whether or not the allegations of conspiracy, fake electors, hold up without those official acts, and whether or not all the elements can be met. I, again, haven't had a chance to read the whole indictment, but with the parts I did read, it seems like if they can prove the facts that they stated, at least for the first few causes of action, the main ones, it should hold. I just don't know what this SCOTUS is going to do. They clearly did not want this to go forward, and much like Gore v. Bush, they went out of their area to create that went beyond what they were supposed to do. They are supposed to make a decision based on a case or controversy brought before them. They're not supposed to speculate or create situations. Back with Gore v. Bush, the Supreme Court created a whole procedure for the safe harbor thing, which Florida law had not provided for. So they basically wrote the law, something they always accuse liberal justices of doing. And in this case, he went way outside of the scope of what was even in front of him to try to direct what Smith and the courts can or cannot do. Smith was very meticulous and is like, so that nobody could misunderstand. This was a private person. This was it makes you look like an idiot. It makes anybody reviewing it, any judge, it basically writing to him like in that line of the old court movie Philadelphia, like they're a 6-year-old. Yeah. I mean, it is written that there's almost a feel of snark to it. I mean, it's just and so it should survive based on what I've read so far. I mean, at least the few of them, but I just don't know, because the Supreme Court seems set on protecting Trump. Now, maybe when he's no longer the candidate next year, and if he hasn't gotten a chance to pardon himself and they uphold that, then maybe they won't care as much. Right now, he is the leader of the Republican Party. If he loses by this time next year, he won't be, and that's about when the case would get to them, and they won't feel any more necessity of protecting them so that their candidate can win. But I'm talking very cynically, because it was result-oriented decision, and that includes Roberts, who has expressed concern about about how the court looks, but it looks bad. I mean, really bad.
Yeah. So there's the two, besides the impact on the case perception, how the Supreme Court might perceive the filing. It's moving forward pretty quickly. I saw that Judge Chutkin is talking about getting something on the calendar for September 5th for a hearing, so that they could get a calendar going and start putting some timeline, some milestones.
And those hearings could lead to disclosures of certain things and evidence that do get into. There won't be a conviction by the election day, but hearings that will have an effect, that could potentially have an effect on it. Not to mention the sentencing hearing for the trial that did happen.
You anticipated my question, and I think what you said is there's a chance that there'll be some disclosures before November election day.
Yeah. There will be, because there's going to be motions. There will be a motion, a demur, and a motion for dismissal based on what the laws that they have, and that involves discussion of the actual allegations. And whether or not they have the evidence to support it, there'll be a discussion of the evidence. It will happen. Jack Smith hasn't asked for anything to be expedited, by the way. He's resigned to these trials. They are going to happen afterwards. But yes, there are going to be now some motions that probably would have been done by now if it wasn't for the appeals and what Jack Smith had to do to clean up the complaint to meet this really horrible Supreme Court decision. There are going to be some hearings where the details of the case are going to be discussed, and it's going to involve some of the worst characters in it, Eastman, and the like, and the fake elector scheme will have to be discussed in detail as to whether or not that was a thing, because Trump's attorneys have to challenge as to whether or not that was even inappropriate, if it's protected by the First Amendment, and they're going to have to get into details as to that. They may not discuss necessarily the evidence in the first initial hearings, but they will discuss the allegations.
And I know we're in our closing seconds here, but there are going to be political implications that for any of these disclosures that come out in this process going forward, that it'll give the news cycle a chance to comment. And so, for example, you mentioned the fraudulent electors. Some of those people are party leadership. Some of them, I recall, I don't remember if it's Arizona, Michigan, or both. Some of them are electors again. So it's going to be contemporaneous with the election. If the Harris campaign and maybe some investigative journalists choose it to be so, they could really highlight. They could make it part of our political discourse. So I'm sure we're going to be revisiting this in the coming weeks too.
In many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious. Just imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails, and how he would use the immense powers of the presidency of the United States. He plans to create a national anti-abortion coordinator and force states to report on women's miscarriages and abortions. Simply put, they are out of their minds.
Okay, back to the race. itself. We've talked in the past few weeks about Kamala Harris's incredible turnaround of the election. I'm not even sure it should really be called a turnaround, because everybody's like saying, "Oh, been a big reversal of the Biden numbers," but in the polls. But do the Biden polls even count, or are these polls of her on her own merits? And should we talk about it as a turnaround in the polls, or just these are the polls that that pertain to her and are relevant? But at any rate, however you want to talk, if you want to talk about movement from the Biden polls to the current Harris polls, there have been movements by as much as 9 points in some of them. I think like the lowest one, if you go to 538 or Real Clear Politics, you go down and you'll see a bunch of blue positives, anywhere from 1 point to 7 points. Even one poll, probably an outlier, that had her ahead nationally by 9 points. And then you go to the battleground states. Not only is she doing well in Georgia, but North Carolina, Cook's political report, just switched it from lean Republican to toss-up. And a lot going on there. Now, North Carolina, like Georgia and like Texas, continue to change in their demographics. People are moving in there and other people are dying off. It's just, hate to put it that way, but that's what's happening. So much so that she actually seems to be doing better in North Carolina than she is in Nevada, which the Democrats have taken the past couple of times. But she also has brought it even in Nevada. And given the fact that the Senate candidate there, Rawson, is defeating her opponent by almost 10 percentage points, I think, average at this point. Is it a she or a he? Maybe I'm confusing them. I don't know. Anyway, the Democratic candidate is doing really well, and that's probably going to be a reverse shirt tail for Harris. But I think, given the way the media is covering, the way they've tried to attack Walz, for everything, including a dog post he did 4 years ago, which just turned out to be total garbage. It was two different dogs because he was in a dog park. But they were referencing the same name to the same photographs, and they were in the same park. Anyway, I don't even want to get into it. It's complete BS. But there are now all kinds of memes going out. Tim Walz claimed that he had had the Monday morning blues, but there is no medical diagnosis, right? It's just they're making fun of what the right wingers and the media keep wanting to join on to it. So the attacks on him have only backfired. They attack the whole amount of the whole attack for the stolen valor crap. Is all it's doing is reminding voters of his 24 years of service, as they're calling him a quitter. And does Trump really want to go there? There's a lot to discuss. The media coverage, the euphoria, I think they've got like over 200,000 volunteers since she entered the race. The fundraising, and flawlessly executed. If for somebody political like me looking for substance, flawed, but then every convention is. I don't even know why I bother to watch conventions a lot of times, but just seems to have done well. They can't even say whether or not she's getting a bounce from it, because the upward slant of her poll things is just like a constant, graph function. So did she get a bounce from the convention, or would she be getting those votes anyway? It's just momentum anyway. We'll see if it continues. She has her first interview tomorrow she does have Tim Walz with her. Some journalists are cynically referring to him as her comfort animal or something like that. But, this is the first time she's been interviewed since she has declared her race. And she has not done well in all the interviews in the past. She gets a little defensive. and doesn't learn how to be the politician and just shut it down with vague answers. Like back when she was asked, I'm going to toss it to you and I'll come back to that point. But the question is she now officially the front runner?
I would say based on the momentum and some of the data points that we've had leading up to today, because like I said earlier in this show, that the timeline is sort of compressed and the news cycle it's flying by. People would I believe it to be the case that the media and the perception is that she's the front runner, but in fact it is like really even. We're probably going to see her maintain a little bit of a sort of on the books paper lead, because of the swing from it looking like a near certainty that Biden was going to lose to now a very strong Democratic candidate with an edge. So I mean, if I had to say, is she the front runner? Only the thinnest of marginally, yes. But so why do I say it like this? Why do I couch my answer? Because even though Harris and Walz now that there's this convention bump because it was well orchestrated, it had an affirmative message, well received, highly publicized, and Trump and Vance just keep shooting themselves in the feet by engaging in controversial behavior, controversial
They're not
messaging.
finding her footing. They don't even know how to attack her.
Yeah,
they're still attacking Biden.
Yeah, so that slipperiness is working to Harris Walz's advantage, but I'd say that on the margins, the reality is that now that RFK Jr.'s dropped down and endorsed Trump, and Tulsi Gabbard has joined his transition team, it's pulling a little bit of the gravity away from his downward. I don't know if that's the right metaphor. It's arresting a little bit his downward spiral. And so if we think
until his people got into a shoving match with Arlington cemetery workers, but we'll talk about that.
More controversy, totally. But what I was going to say is that, when Harris announced, RFK's support was basically cut almost in half, and that most of that went to fill in that gap between that was between Biden and Trump, and now it's for Harris. But RFK is still polling at 4 to 5%, depending on where and when these days. So there is this potential that if he can get some traction from the marginal third party people that are sympathetic in theory to flipping the table, that's Trump's lane. So that could pull some of the momentum. Like I said, arrest the downward spiral. Also, there's the debate. Like you said, I think you said it, but if not, maybe I just projected.
Yes,
but the debate is coming up September 10th, and that's like right around the corner. Oh, you said the interview, right? So the interview is tomorrow, and that's a big deal because Harris has avoided. Although she has said some specific policies, she hasn't answered. She's only everything that she's done so far has been on her terms. But in an interview, even if you have the most sympathetic of audience, and Dana Bash is professional, nonpartisan, probably also sympathetic. So the interview will probably go really well. And we could talk a little bit about that when you talk about Walz being the support.
All she has to do is learn how to keep things vague. In a review, look like you're answering the question when you're not answering the question. She hadn't gotten that down. Like all she had to do with the famous one where she got defensive about, well, are you going to the border? And she was like, what does that mean? Who cares? What? I'm not going to Europe either. That all she had to say is, I have no current plans to go to the border, but that will be a topic of discussion with our advisors. That's all she had to say instead of getting defensive. And I have a feeling that they are coaching her and preparing her for this and other interviews to come, because she does have to do one herself.
I was going to say, to be fair, she's been on message. The speech writers have been top, on top of their game. She's been at the top of her game. There's some degree of letdown that probably will occur unless she's just rising to the occasion in a historic way that goes against all that we know about her. If you look at her approval rating, actually, she used to be -17. Now she's just -2. I mean, this sounds like inside baseball, but that's a big deal.
It's sort of unheard of in modern politics to be that close to even in favorability.
Yeah, now because all the institutions are people are if you're not apathetic, then you're you're uh I don't know what the right word is. The political equivalent of frustration and some degree of desperation that there's something different on the horizon. I think that this vacuum right now is filled by the hope of change here. Even though she's the incumbent vice president, somehow she's getting the bounce of being changed. So before I forget, I just want to say, like, well, what could work against her, right? So she is the incumbent and as vice president anyway, and so she runs this. She's trying to play it both ways. That okay, well, I'm the hope and the change for the future, which she is manifest for Democrats anyway. But she has to answer for all the policies of her administration that she had virtually no control over. And we don't have to get into the the theory behind that, but the truth is, as a vice president, she had very little to do with it. So I'm going to mention that inflation is very tame, and the Fed is signaling they're going to cut rates a little bit now, and they're going to cut rates a little bit more going down the road. So the economy would probably not see a recession. Will probably maybe even grow. So the cost of business, this will lower the cost of businesses, lower the cost of households. That works in her favor. There's a lot of tailwinds that she has. So I'll toss it back to you, but she's in a relatively good place. So much so that she's gaining amongst Latinos, the young people, independents. So this is opening up states like Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina. So she's actually there's like this potential energy right below the surface for her to really break out. But right for now, it's just real even, and it's a coin toss.
Yeah, I mean, she is actually starting to shell out some policy stuff that doesn't really contradict Biden, but adds to it as to the future. Like she just put out an ad on housing. She wants to build 3 million new homes over her term. She wants to ban the private equity corporation purchases of homes in residentially in certain zoned areas. I mean, there's a lot of things that she's actually starting to get into a little bit of detail for, and she can point to that. And of course, the big issue that she is going to start writing a little bit more that she hasn't really done as much up until now is going to be abortion, because that's where she shines. In terms of the fact that there are over 70% of people who support choice, at least in one form or another, and so so she is going to have to do it. She just has to really get down and anticipate the questions and just say where she's caught up, saying, I'm part of an administration now. I can't really comment too much on the current policy, but this is the direction I want to move it in. And if they say, well, is that different or the same as Biden? You say you'll have to make up your mind. Voters will have to make up your mind. She just has to learn how to not lose her cool and stay on message the way she's been doing. And she has had a few short conversations with reporters where she's handled herself well, but she definitely needs to do this. I think that the Republicans are going to be a little disappointed because they pushed for this, saying, "Oh, she's going to choke," and now that she's done it, it's not, the expectation in this game just isn't going to play against her unless she does choke. But I have a hard time seeing how she does it, especially with Walz there, who makes her look good every time. So I do think she is the front runner. Yes, it's all close. Most of the polls are within the margin of error, but when it's all of the polls, there is a statistical issue there of having her ahead. I also don't think that the Trump factor is going to be in play as much this time around as the Dobbs effect that we've talked about. I think that and most will be a wash, but I think that there are voters out there that are being registered right now in numbers. That was the other reason Biden was losing, by the way. Republicans were way ahead in voter registration because Biden didn't even have volunteers doing it. Now, I mean, it's an incredible rate that people are registering to vote to vote for her. We've only got 2 minutes to go, and there's so much to talk about this. I do want to say there's another tactic that she's using right now, which is a little bit risky because it could be wasting time. How much of a reward does she get from it? But in Pennsylvania and in Georgia, and probably they'll do in every swing state, they're going on bus tours into, I guess, sort of the red areas. And right now in Georgia, she's in rural areas and speaking in front of school bands and things like that. We'll see if it pans out for her, but the activists in Georgia and Pennsylvania begged her to do it. She's doing it, and she may continue to do that.
I know we're in the closing seconds, but I want to just repeat that you said there are specific policies, pro-family policies, healthcare support, housing supports, addressing inflation, some movement on foreign policy, although minimal, but sufficient enough to show progress, and that Walz really does speak to people. He does speak to working class, middle class folks in a language that they understand. There's a lot to be gained from going to these red areas, in part because of the correlation. So if you do well in, say, Pennsylvania, that's correlated highly with, say, Michigan. You do well in Wisconsin, that correlates with Minnesota. And similarly, Arizona and Nevada. Similarly, North Carolina and Georgia. So doing a little bit of extra outreach into the areas that are crossover areas, that has a ripple effect and almost a compounding effect. And you know, like I said, if it's the case that Walz adds that suspending your disbelief, because people have a tendency to see the negative, hear the negative, internalize the negative, but Walz gives that positive that is just enough to open people's minds, and that could really be the difference on the margin.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to predictions. What do you have, Dave?
Following up on what we covered in the last segment about the importance of, say, North Carolina, Nate Silver published a piece recently where he said, could Kamala Harris really win North Carolina? And so when you kind of look through the data underneath, one thing worth mentioning is that North Carolina is now third only to Pennsylvania and Michigan as the state most likely to be the pivot state, the deciding state. Because of its, you know, the amount of electoral votes that it has, and how if it goes to, say, Kamala Harris or Trump, either way, there's an 86% chance of that person winning the election or something like that, some really high number. The Cook Political Report just said it moved to a toss-up, so it's in play, and they're the first state to begin any form of early voting. County officials mail absentee ballots next week, so it's happening. The correlation between, say, what happens in Georgia, where Democrats won last time, versus North Carolina, where they didn't, is one of the strongest pairings in all the states. So if you look, as cities in North Carolina get bigger, they trend Democratic, and this momentum is strong, and the prospects look good for the Harris-Walz campaign in North Carolina. So I'm saying, based on their performance and policy priorities at the convention, demographic trends in North Carolina and Georgia, similarities and high correlation between states, and the likelihood that North Carolina will be a pivotal state, I expect we'll see Trump's lead diminish in the coming weeks, and ultimately the contest will shift towards Harris to lead the southern battleground states, which will complement their lead in the northern states, and that will likely be the difference in the outcome of the election.
All right, I'll try to be quick here, but I'm starting to make some Senate predictions and some House predictions. I am going to predict based on a bunch of things that I don't have time to go into now, but that in New Mexico, the Democrats will sweep the 3 House positions there, and people have been wondering what's going to happen in Pennsylvania. I think Casey is going to win easily. I think Jackie Rawson is the name, is going to defeat Brown easily in Nevada. Gallego is ahead 15 points in the latest poll in Arizona. Slotkin in Michigan is way out in front. I don't think any of these are going to be issues. I think it's going to come down to Montana. And I'm actually predicting that Brown wins in Ohio. I think it's going to come down to Montana and whether or not the Democrats can possibly flip either Florida or Texas. difficult, but not impossible, to quote Abe Vigoda's character in The Godfather. So we'll see if any of that comes true, but until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.